All right. Tonight's learning is Le'ili Nishmat Yaakov ben Chaim, Mark Kishal's father, whose yahrzeit is tonight, and also Nava Tova Bat Yehoshua, a small child, unfortunately, who passed away very recently in Shiloh, and has the family, his friends here in Malay Adamim meets Ben Nevo. What we're going to do tonight is to finish Bezrat Hashem, finish off chapter 1, Parak Aleph, with one topic only, and then a little introduction to Parak Bet, and then we're going to start talking about Parak Bet. Parak Bet is an unusual chapter, and I don't want to play my hand just yet. Oh, please send password again. Hold on one second. I'm asking a couple of people asking for the link. It won't take password. I don't know. Hold on one second, ladies and gentlemen. You put it on pause. And therefore, what we'll do is finish up the first chapter, first parak, a little introduction to the second parak, which is a very unusual parak, and then we'll get into that parak as well. So we are in Sefer Ezra, Parak Aleph, and we're going to do read two psukim right now. We're going to look at pasuk Zayin and Chet, number 7 and number 8. This is right after, of course, Koresh makes his declaration, telling the Jews they are allowed to go back to Israel and build the Beit HaMikdash. He leaves no comment there about, what they should do with the land, the country, buildings. It was strictly about the Beit HaMikdash. The other part was, of course, that those who are not going to go are going, those people who are left behind, who stay behind by choice, or in some cases it wasn't their choice. They had the means, they didn't have the ways to go. They had to help finance the trip, along with sending people or things to be brought to the Beit HaMikdash. So what I want to do is just, like I say, look at two psukim right now in Parak Aleph, pasuk Zayin and Chet, and Sue, you're upside down. I think you need to turn your phone. Tov, are you doing your Ben Gurion impression? V'hamelech Koresh hotzi et klei Beit Hashem. Koresh took out the utensils that were originally for the Beit HaMikdash. Asher hotzi Nebuchadnezzar miYerushalayim. The Nebuchadnezzar had removed from Yerushalayim, vayitnem b'veit Elohav, and he put it in the house of his gods. Meaning that the very same utensils of the Beit HaMikdash that we talked about at the end of Sefer Melachim and that we looked at on the Arch of Titus, Yamach Shemo in Paris. Those utensils he now takes out from, they were stored in the house of the lowercase g gods of Nebuchadnezzar. Next pasuk, Chet. Vayotzeim Koresh Melech Paras, and the king of Paras, Persia, Koresh, took out Al Yad Mitradat Hagizbar, Vayisparem L'Shash Betzar Hanasi Lihuda. What did he do? He brought out these things through the office of Mitradat, who was his treasurer, and he gave an inventory to Shashbetzar, who was the prince or the Nasi of Yehuda. Very nice. The only question I'd like to raise right now, but it could be others, but I want to deal with one, and that is the fact that within two psukim it uses the word lahotzi 3 different times. And the question is, why would it use that particular verb to take out 3 times? They don't obviously mean or refer to the exact same action, but we're going to take a look at one brief slide now from the Dat Sofrim. So Shalosh pe'amim niskar al hotzaat kelim. 3 times it mentions the concept of the removal of these utensils. On one occasion, the word lahotzi is used in reference to that Nebuchadnezzar took them out from the Jews, from the Beit HaMikdash. And 2 times it refers to Koresh bringing them out. It refers to this. Now, there's other opinions. I'm just going to mention just this one right now. And that is that it has to do with the fact that these things were so precious, not just to the Jews, but they were seen as very precious items by the conquerors, and then also by Koresh himself, who wasn't the conqueror, that it was like taken with extra care, that there were lots of, if you were going to go into a store and buy a very expensive piece of, not jewelry, because that's very small, but a very expensive piece of furniture, or very expensive piece of silver, large something silver. I don't think you're just going to say to this person, okay, just drop it in the car, please. Okay, you're going to have extra care taken. You're going to wrap it extra carefully. When you move, you don't want them just hopefully taking all your stuff and throw it in the back of a truck. You want it to be taken care of carefully. So this is according to Dat Sofrim. Again, there's other opinions. I'm not going to go into all of them right now. That is just to show us their extreme level of care that was taken with these particular items. Now, throughout Tanakh, okay, sorry, I want to finish before I do that next thing. I want to finish the parak now. I'm not going to get into any details on that. Just the last three psukim of the parak. We read them before the beginning when we first read the whole parak. Pasuk Tet number 9. Ve'ele misparam, and now gives us an inventory of the items that were taken out of storage. Argetaleg zahav shiloshim. These are golden basins that were taken out. There were 30 of them. Argetaleg kesef aleph. There were 1,000 silver basins. Machlafim tisha ve'esrim, and 29 knives. Pasuk Yud number 10. Kefurei. I got to take my glasses off. Kefurei zahav shloshim. 30 gold bowls. Kefurei chesef mishnim. 410 silver double bowls. Kelim achirim elef. And then they give a general catch-all phrase of utensils, another 1,000 miscellaneous. Almost every one of the Parshanim that talks about these numbers says that if you don't see it as an exact, if it's a rounded number, more than likely it was a rounded number. Meaning there weren't necessarily 1,000, probably maybe there were 927, but it was rounded. But when you see the number like 29, and more than likely these numbers had significance and all, but I didn't really find too many people speak about them. Yud Aleph, last pasuk. Kol kelin la zahav la kesef, 5,400. Altogether, there were 5,400 gold and silver utensils. Hakol he'ela shesh batzar im he'alot hagola mi Bavel Yerushalayim. Shesh batzar is the one who then takes all these back, along with the exiles, the people themselves, when they return from Bavel to Yerushalayim. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. If you have the text in front of you, I'd like you just to take a peek and look through Perek Bet. Just turn the page or scroll if you have it on your computer or if you have it on your phone. Just scroll through the chapter. It's 70 psukim. 70 psukim is a very, 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 very long chapter for Tanakh. Completely. I mean, there's some that have 60, but they have 70 psukim is very long. But if you take a look and you start flipping through, you'll see that it's almost completely made up of names. Now, we know that in Tanakh, many times, there are various times that there are lists, names, locations. If you look in Sefer Yoshua, early on in Sefer Yoshua, you see a list of kings. You know that at the end of Parshat Vayetze, it was my brother's bar mitzvah parsha, so it's easy for me to remember. At the end of Vayetze, you have all these aluf zeh, all these generals. So lists are not that unusual. Probably one of the most well-known, because we read it so many times, is the list of the Niseim and the gifts that they brought to the Hanukkah Mizbeach, or to the Hanukkah Bayit, when the Mishkan was first inaugurated. We read it every day of Hanukkah. There are 12 days of the bringing of the korbanot. There's a list of what every single person brought, and then there's an account to get in. So a list is not that unusual. And nor is a list of names. We see the list of names of the people that went down to Mitzrayim. We see a list of names of descendants. We see in Parshat Pinchas many, many names. So it's not unusual. So the tendency for some people would be, and when I was back in the summer, when I first started, thinking about teaching Sefer Ezra, and I was learning, again, I learned the Sefer Ezra in Nehemiah before. Never not learned it, but I never learned it to teach it. So when I started going through it, I said, okay, I'll just read through the names. Boom, we're going to move on to Perek Bet. And I realized recently what a big mistake that would have been. We are going to read through just some of these psukim with just reading the names, because we can't not read the names, and I'll explain why in a minute. But there are some diamonds that are hidden within these psukim that you could, if you just read the names, you would miss some information. You'd miss some very interesting information, I believe. So, I said I was going to come back to that. What was it about the names? I guess I'll come back to it soon. Okay. I forgot. Let's go.
There was something else about the first chapter you wanted to say.
Something about what?
The first chapter, Perek Aleph. Before we got onto all the names in Perek Bet.
Well, I'll probably think of it at 2 a.m, and then what I'll do is I'll send out a link to a new class, and we can all get together at 2 a.m. I don't remember what it was.
Well, the next class for Ezra and Nehemiah will be Sunday coming, so it's fasting. So it's
maybe I'll think of it by then.
It's some Sunday.
Bezrat Hashem. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to this next parak. We're going to look at 2 brief slides from Datzofrim. Rishimot hayachas. Rishimot hayachas nitan makom rav b'Torah. In Torah, as I mentioned, in Tanakh in general, the concept of listing of names. I know what I was going to say. It wasn't about the first chapter. It was about this section. Imagine 500 years from now, someone digs up a list of names of everyone who made Aliyah from 1980 to 2022. And let's say there's 25,000 names in the United States. Stam, throwing out a number. And on that list, the Trops, the Chandelovs, Kishels, the list goes on, the Coopers, the list goes on and on. Imagine someone picks up that list and goes, bunch of names. But every one of those names represented something. Every one of those names represented a family. Everyone represented an individual, a story. I have a friend I grew up with, he was named Ira, but he became Yitzchak when he made Aliyah after 8th grade. And his father, Zichrono Livracha, was a bookbinder. And he decided to try to do something. He printed and bound a book. It's about this thick. It only has one word in it, and it says Jew, but it's in there 6 million times. The entire book is just made up of the word Jew, printed 6 million times. And you turn the pages. I've had it. I don't own it, but I saw it at his house. And you turn the page, and you turn the page, and you look. It's not just the overwhelming amount of words of just the word Jew and to make an idea of how much we're talking about, but it's almost like you saw names. And every one of those words of Jew represented another human being. Another Jew was murdered for being a Jew. That's the dark side. That's the flip side. The good side is that when you take a look at the list of names of people who made Aliyah, there's an honor roll, and every one of them has a story, and everyone has a history. And the same is true when it comes to the following list that we're going to start tonight. Some of the names we're going to go into. Some of them we'll read through, not get into any detail. And some of the names are going to be unusual, not the names themselves, but who they were, what position they had. We're going to see that it wasn't just, and we mentioned briefly when we first talked about the beginning of the Perek Aleph, it wasn't just the upper crust that went. It wasn't just the people who had money. As a matter of fact, in some cases, we're going to see is some people who were kind of like just tag-alongs. But let's let the Datzofrim talk for us for a minute. So he says over here, what's not that unusual to have, or he doesn't say it like that. He says that a large amount of the Torah is taken up with various lists of genealogy. Sefer Bereshit Rishimat Rashi Hadorot miAdam ad Noach. We know that if you take a look in Bereshit, there's a list of all the different generations from Adam to Noach. Rishimat Shivim Ha'umot, we also have a list of all the 70 nations. Yachas Avraham Avinu, also the descendants of Avraham, and further, and others. The Sefer Bamidbar nimseru ha'mefakdim shel bnei Yisrael shmot rashi batei ha'avot. Again, there was a counting beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, all the names. V'chach nimsar mipi Hashem al dvarim sheshum makom acher lo haya yachol hadat otam al diukam. Makor, sorry. That there's no other way we could have known these names had they not appeared in the Torah. So why are they there? That people, and specifically the Jewish people, should know who they were. It shouldn't be some unknown Ploni Almoni, some Joe Schmo who just, oh yeah, they were the descendants. It's just kind of like flowing water. That's all. It's just people that came. I am, unlike some people in my family, I'm very, very, very much into genealogy and into family. I like looking at as far back as I can go. Unfortunately, we've had people in our family try to trace our generations back, and we get back to the early 1800s. That's about as far back as I'm aware of. And I find it fascinating. I find it fascinating that I can look at a person, and in some cases, even a picture of someone from the late 1800s, to know that I am a descendant of that individual, that he's my great, great, great 5 or 6 great grandfather, who obviously didn't know me. I didn't know him, but yet we are connected somehow. And then you look at the picture, you look at the information where he came from, and I'm interested because it's me. It's part of me. It's where I come from. So in a sense, these people that we're going to talk about, or the people who are in the Torah, who are the names of the descendants of Abraham, or the 70 people who came to Mitzrayim, or the names of the generations of Adam to Noach, and all these things, we have a direct connection to all these individuals. And therefore, it's important to have these names. So let's take a look at one more point he makes that you will see also if you compare. Well, let him talk again. Hamifkad shebesefer zehu hadal iben kol mefakdim shel Am Yisrael. This is one of the thinnest lists of names, or countings, I should say, not names, but countings of all the countings of the Jewish people. What does that mean? There's a ton of, there's 70 psukim here. He's talking about numbers. When you will see the amount of people, tachlis, how many there are, it's a very small number. When you're talking about the counting of Am Yisrael and Bamidbar, you're talking hundreds of thousands of people. Here you're talking about 10 or 12, 11,000 people. It's a counting of a people who has been diminished after Churban, after the destruction, and after exile. There's a very good big honor to this small amount of people who on their own chose to return, who chose on their own to return to Israel and to build the Beit HaMikdash in the land, in Hashem's holy land. The same can be said about us. And it's not to toot our own horns, but it is, because we're doing something in the same spirit as the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. No matter if you're here for 40 years or you're here for a few weeks, when you make Aliyah, you become a chain in the rebuilding of the land of Israel at whatever state it's in, leading towards Bezrat Hashem, the actual Beit HaMikdash. I want to take a look now at the first pasuk. If I find it in my book. Here we go. Okay, this is now Parak Bet, chapter 2, first pasuk. We're going to get through tonight pasuk Aleph and Bet. That's all. It's not going to be that pace, by the way, for the entire chapter. But once I finish with pasuk Aleph and Bet and the things I want to make a comment on, we're going to stop, no matter what time it is. I can't hear what you said.
Beli neder.
Beli neder. Well, I didn't finish my sentence. Beli neder. Bezrat Hashem. What?
Even if it's 9 o'clock, because then I miss my next Zoom share at 8 o'clock.
It'll be way before that. Okay. Aleph. I'm going to read just the first 2 psukim. These are the people of the country, and I'm purposely leaving this a little vague. These are the people of the country who are going up from the captivity of the exile. Asher hegla Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel livavel, that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Bavel, had brought to Bavel. Vayashuvu liYerushalayim v'Yehuda, and they returned to Yerushalayim and to Yehuda. Ish le'iro, each one to his city. Bet. Asher bau'im, now these are the first few names. Bau'im Zerubbabel, Yeshua, Nehemiah, Seraya, Re'elaya, Mordechai, Bilshan, Mispar, Bigvai, Rechum, Ba'ana, Mispar, Anshe Am Yisrael. Okay, lots of stuff here. And this is why I say that you could just, okay, these are the people who came, and here's the names. We need to focus on these 2 psukim as more or less an introduction to this entire text. So we take a look at, do this here. Okay. First thing we want to talk about is what is this? Actually, there's something before this slide. And I'm just going to mention it to you. It's not going to be on the slide. If we look at the first three words, it says Ve'ela b'nei hamedina ha'olim, right? These are the people of the nation who went on Aliyah, who went back to Israel. So there's actually a machloket or dispute between Rashi and the Ibn Ezra as to who these people are that we're talking about. So I'm just going to read you a couple words. The Ibn Ezra says the Bnei HaMedina are the Medinat Bavel. It's referring to the people who came from Bavel. And Rashi says, Ele Bnei Yisrael, Asher Medinat Eretz Yisrael, Ha'olim Ata Min HaShevi, Asher Begola Yerushalayim. So they may be saying the same thing, or they may be complementing, or they may disagree. But in general, it's either people who were growing up there, who were born there, growing up there, or it might be people who were in Israel, went into Galut and went back to Israel. We're going to see a resolution for this very shortly, though, that more or less appears to be what Rashi is saying is the main opinion. Yes.
Don't we have both of them there? When they say the Beit HaMikdash was built, the young people were ecstatic that we have a Beit HaMikdash.
Correct.
And the old people
were crying
because it was nothing like that. So
Nachon.
obviously, both groups came home. Both groups came home.
You're right, but as you're going to see, just like in a similar fashion that Bnei Yisrael went into Galut in stages, they return in stages. So the first stage, when they go into Galut, and we're going to see, they have a very hard, they want to build a Beit HaMikdash, and they're stopped. And it's going to be a period of time until they get to actually rebuild it. And during the map time, starting in Perek Zion, when we meet Ezra, and he starts to take people, that's going to be another wave, okay? So that won't necessarily tell us for sure if in this wave we have both, okay? But that's a good point. So what does it mean they went? If you look at the pasuk, it says, "Ve'ela b'nei hamedina ha'olim mishvi hagolah." They went up from the captivity of the Golah. I mean, you remember we said in the introduction to Sefer Ezra that the Jews had it pretty good. They had a good life. So what do you mean the captivity of the Golah? Here he said, "Mipnei shehaYehudim beVavel shruim hayu b'tnaim tovim ba'ofen yachasi." Since the Jews who were living in Babel had pretty good conditions, relatively speaking, hudgash, it's emphasized here, ki gam b'sha'azo hayu b'shevi uvegolah. They still were living in Gullus. They were still in a form of captivity. And they felt it. Because of the fact they were surrounded by idolaters. Now, one of the differences, maybe, between that time period, at least according to Dat Sofrim, and nowadays, is that the people, even though they were in Galut, and life was pretty good, they still were very well aware of the fact they were in Galut. On the other hand, nowadays, it is very likely, in many cases, that you have people who are living a very fine life in Galut, and at the same time are not aware of the fact and not sensitive to the fact that they are in Galut. I read a letter to the editor of a magazine. Actually, someone sent it to me. It's a number of years ago. It's at least 10 years ago. There was one of the magazines, I don't remember which one, an English magazine, that someone sent me a picture of a letter to the editor. It had to do, there was an article, I guess, the month before about Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot, meaning the second day of Chag in Chutz La'aretz. And she was extolling and saying this is how God wants it, that this is even better than the original recipe, that this is what we can be relaxed. The first day is difficult, and the second day is the better day, and it's on and on and on and on and on and on. No, that's not what Hashem wants. Hashem, that's b'diavad. That's like a secondary approach. That's not the best way. That's not the chatchila. People who justify, they say, they have sometimes, we discussed this at the beginning of the Sefer in the introduction, there are plenty of people in Chutz La'aretz who need to be in Chutz La'aretz. I don't dispute that. But there are plenty of people who are in Chutz La'aretz that don't even realize they're in Chutz La'aretz. And that's a big problem. When we talked a little bit about the history of, I forgot when I mentioned this, but that Lithuania, that there was what was referred to as the Yerushalayim Delita, that they replaced, what's that?
Vilna was called
Vilna, right. Vilna was referred to as Yerushalayim Delita, the Lithuanian Jerusalem. When you start to make this replacement, and you say that you can have Yerushalayim in Chutz La'aretz, big problem. Enough of the pontificating. You'll also notice that Nebuchadnezzar's name is mentioned in this pasuk with an extra vav. Okay, he just talks about the fact that it's not a Hebrew name, anyways. It is a trying to deal with the Bavli name, a Babylonian name. But I'm going to go down to here. It says that what did Nebuchadnezzar do? He's the Melech Bavel. He took them to Bavel. Why did you say Nebuchadnezzar? He brought them to Bavel, or just say we know them Bavel. That's where the story is taking place. We know that because if you look at the very first pasuk, what does it say? Uvishnat achat lakosh melech Paras, right? And who was he the king of? The king of Paras was the king of Persia. They had already Bavel. We know that the story ends in Sefer Melachim. They're going to Bavel. It tells us here, Hayu anashim shuglu gam lemakomot acherim. Achozrim hayu rak me'ele shuglu leBavel. That besides Bavel, Nebuchadnezzar and others brought the Jews to other areas for being exiled, but it is only the Jews that were in Bavel that were brought back or that went back to Israel in this particular situation. Now, it also says in that pasuk, at the end of the pasuk, it says, "Vayashuvu liYerushalayim v'Yehuda ish le'iro." That they went back to Jerusalem, to Yehuda, each to his city. What does that mean? What do you mean each to his city? After World War II, when the fighting was over, so the Italians went back to Italy, Germans went back to Germany, Russians went back to Russia, and so on. And the Jews didn't have anywhere to go. Their homes were destroyed, their communities were destroyed, their cities were destroyed. They were homeless. They literally had nowhere to return. Because after a war, that's what normally happens. You go home. After the Vietnam War, Lahavdil, after the Vietnam War, so the American soldiers got on planes and they went back to the United States. And after whatever war, the people just returned. That's how it works after battle. You go home. Jews didn't have a home to go to. The Jews, in the time of the destruction of Beit HaMikdash, we remember, for those of you who remember Sefer Melachim, were exiled in 3 stages. First up north, then the entire northern kingdom, first partially up north, then the entire northern kingdom, then 130 years later, the rest of the area of Yehuda, basically the greater Jerusalem area. The Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the land was laid waste in many cases. What does this mean? They went back ish le'iro, each to his city. A very pronounced amount of people that were returning now to Israel were actually the very same ones who were sent into Galut back in 70 years ago. V'zachru et arei moladtam, and they remembered their birthplace, umiharu l'shul alehem, and they hurried to go back to it. Aval b'nei aseret hashvatim. Now this is talking about in the area of Yehuda, meaning again the greater Yerushalayim area. Aval b'nei aseret hashvatim, but the tribes from the northern kingdom, the 10 from the northern kingdom, shahayu bein ha'olim, who were among those who now are going from Bavel to Israel, lo hayu lahem ksharim ka'elu. They did not have this connection to their homeland or to their home city. Va'af lo yadu le'an lashuv. They didn't even know where to go to. Because it was over 200 years from the time they went into Galut. Because remember, what did I just say? First, you had the northern kingdom, and then 130 years later, you had the area of Yehuda and Shomron, of Yerushalayim. So the ones who were sent into Galut from the northern kingdom, it's been 200 years since their families, their original families went into Galut. And therefore, it's not like they had this knowledge and connection. And right now, we're in the year Tafshin Pei Bet. So you go back, and this is the secular year 2021. Go back to 1820. Imagine you say, "Oh, my parents came from Brisk. They came from whatever Drilj. My grandfather Shalom came from Drilj in Poland it was there in the early 1900s rather. Okay, I have a connection, but what do I know from Drilj? What do I know from Brest-Litovsk? What do I know from any of these cities? right? I don't have a historical connection, but the people from the area of the Yerushalayim, they had a direct connection. You're talking to some people themselves who had lived there, and they're returning to their cities or their places. The Chachamim, the elders, told them to settle in their places. Go to the north, go to Yerushalayim, go to the homes, and settle the land in order to reestablish the communities, and to reestablish the crown, so to speak, of old. This is a halacha that many people are unaware of, that we are now in a Shemitah year, and every 7 years is a Shemitah year, and every 7 cycles of Shemitah is followed by a 50th year known as Yovel. In the English, it's called the Jubilee year. We do not necessarily know. You can't say Chad Mashmai, we don't know, because there are some who say we do know. But we cannot necessarily say we don't have the halacha of Yovel, because in order to have Yovel, you have to have all the people in the land of Israel and all their nachalot. So this is one of the reasons that they're being told we need to reestablish our communities all around the land, different nachalot. Maybe what it means, each one to his city, means lishvatim elu. It's specifically to these shvatim it's talking. Meaning, where it talks about the first half of the pasuk, about the golim, the ones who had been sent into galut, those are the people from Yerushalayim, Yehuda, and that's where they returned to. And where it says ish le'iro, that each went back to his city, is talking about the rest of the shvatim, that they would go to the northern kingdom and settle. So instead of giving us this picture in our minds that absolutely everyone went and stayed only in the area of Yerushalayim, there was already a double action going on here. One was go to Yerushalayim area and settle Yerushalayim, and then to build Beit HaMikdash, as is the path here. And the other path is we need to settle the entire land. At the end of this pasuk, actually, before we do that, I want to talk about a couple of the names in the pasuk, and then we'll come back to that slide. There's names I want to talk about just for a couple of minutes, and will lead us to one last discussion if we don't run out of time. The first one is Yeshua, Yud Shin Vav Ayin. He's the second one who's named right after Zerubbabel is Yeshua. Yeshua becomes just as a historical point, he becomes the first Kohen Gadol in the second Beit HaMikdash. The beginning of this list, more or less, are the top tier people, let's say, who were to go on Aliyah. Afterwards, we're going to see the average person, and then we're going to see a different tier, let's just say. We won't get to that till next week at least. But he is Yeshua is the first Kohen Gadol in the second Beit HaMikdash. Nehemiah. Who is this Nehemiah? So most, the Ralbag and others say this is the Nehemiah with the capital Nun. He is Nehemiah, who is the author of the next book we're going to do, Nehemiah. The only problem with saying that it's him is that we see him in Bavel again. Why is that? No, he's here, he's going on Aliyah, and in Sefer Nehemiah, we see he's in Bavel. And these are more or less, and we'll talk about it at a later date, they're more or less chronological Svarim. So therefore, how come he's in Bavel again? So the answer is that he was a very wealthy man. He was a businessman. Besides being who he was also a businessman. And he traveled back and forth multiple times, not just to make a profit. He had also, he wasn't just a capitalist. He was also an altruist, because he used his personal wealth, and we're going to see this in the 5th parak of Nehemiah. It's not because I'm a genius and remember it by heart. I looked it up. In the 5th parak of Nehemiah, that he himself, in some cases, personally funded many of the projects that people needed in order to survive in the land of Israel. We also then have the name Seraya. He is Ezra's father. Note, again, we do not mention Ezra's name in the book of Ezra until the 7th chapter. That's 6 chapters, including one that's replete with names, no name of Ezra, but his father did in fact go. The reason Ezra doesn't go, we only know this from commentaries elsewhere, is that he did not want to leave his rabbi, Baruch ben Neriah. Baruch ben Neriah, who was his mentor, his rav, his everything, Gemara in Megillah tells us that he wanted to stay until a certain time and then go back with his rabbi. But his father, who was actually quite old at this time, does go back. And Sraya was also among what's called the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, which I'm going to discuss probably the very beginning of next week, if not now. Next name I want to mention is Mordechai. Now you'll see it says Mordechai Bilshan. So there's 2 opinions. One says that Mordechai is one name and Bilshan is another name. But others, and seems to be most, say that Mordechai is Mordechai Bilshan, that Bilshan is an adjective, meaning the one from the word Lashonot. It is first of all, it is the Mordechai from the story of Mordechai and Esther. Hey, wait a minute. He's going to Israel. We know the story of Mordechai and Esther takes place in Persia. So what gives? So he also ends up going back for various reasons, which we're going to discuss at a later date. But the fact is that he's either Mordechai Bilshan, meaning again, is a Toar, is the description who he was. He was a man who knew at least 70 languages, which plays a part, of course, in the story of Megillat Esther. Or it's just another name. There's a man whose name was Mordechai, which is Mordechai HaYehudi, and Bilshan was another person, possible. But you'll see that it says, now the name after that says Mispar. That is actually was a person's name. Who he was, I can't tell you. But you see the name again, Mispar, right after that. So that's not the name. There are 2 ways to read the last part of this pasuk. Number one is that, here, let me do that. Let me put it on the slide. Yeah. If you take a look, if you know what I'm talking about, I say trup. Sorry, Harry, calling you by your last name, but trup is the little cantillation marks. If you take a look on the word, this word at the end of the pasuk, mispar, there's a zakef katon, a zakef gadol, and it's that's a note on a word that makes it stand literally by itself. It's not attached to other words. And therefore, because it is, he says, it's in a sense saying it is a descriptor of Am Yisrael, the Anshe Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, were a force to be reckoned with, so to speak, a powerhouse. They were all the people who went in this list were all people who were connected, heavily involved in Am Yisrael. Meaning Nehemiah and Sraya and all the other names, they were not the heads of tribes, something, but they themselves were a number. They were a force that were very involved in Am Yisrael. There's another way to read it, is that this pasuk has the names, and then the last 3 words or 4 words, Mispar Anshe Am Yisrael, is an introduction. It's a koteret or a title to say, now I'm going to give you the counting or an accounting of all those who went into the Galut. I mentioned twice the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. The Anshe Knesset HaGdolah were formed, men of the Great Assembly, in the time of Ezra. Ezra was the founder, Ezra and Nehemiah, and he was the first member. The very last member of the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, as I mentioned a while ago, maybe even in the introduction of this class, was Shimon HaTzadik, which is not just to stop on the light rail. What did they do? How do they affect our lives? Why do I care who they were? So let's just take a quick peek at this. This body of individuals that was, again, says here, I'll just read in English, the translation I'll translate it. The second line in the blue box says it was founded and organized in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah and continued until the time of Shimon HaTzadik. What did they do? So let's go through this list. They established judges and Dayanim to teach Torah and to paskin halacha based on halacha. They are the ones who made the decision what was going to be in the canon of Tanakh. They were the ones also who organized a lot of our tefillot. Not only that, the Shmona Esrei was established by the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. For those of you who learn Gemara and you learn Masechet Brachot, you know that there's a lot of discussion there about the original 18 Brachot and what they were for and what they represent. And then there's a 19th Bracha, and there was another man, Shimon HaPakuli and Shmuel HaKatan, I forgot who it was, involved in this whole establishment of Shmona Esrei that we deal with until this very day. They also did something. They were able to establish various measures to determine who were keeping Torah, mitzvot, and who would be considered a kofar. And that's not the tznius police. That's something totally different. They also were major commentaries, for lack of a better term, based on Kabbalistic ideas of the Torah and also halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And they also established many decrees and takanot when it had to do with payments of any kind of damages when it came to physical injuries. One maybe hurt somebody else or someone's property. So what normally could be an entire shir on what was the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, you really can give a nice long shir on that. I just wanted to kind of give you a little summary, only because some of these names, not only is it this time period where it's established, but some of the names in the beginning of this list of names, including Mordechai and Saraya, were actually part of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. Bezrat Hashem, next week, we're going to continue on Sunday night in our regular time slot. Bezrat Hashem, it shall all go well. And I'll send out a reminder and wish everyone a wonderful evening ahead. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank
Hallelujah.
you.